Hello, I'm excited to be introducing you to integral theory today, a topic that has had a profound impact on my life and has led to a real source of optimism about the future. So I invite you to think about a situation in your own life or when you look out into the world and you see arguments, people clashing around views of what the right answer is or the right perspective. And where you've probably all had experiences where from the outside you can look and see that in fact you don't see that there's necessarily a situation where that can't be resolved, but rather that people are arguing two different perspectives. So integral theory is a meta theory, and Ken Wilber, the head of this movement, went out and looked at all of human knowledge and traditions of how we understand our universe, and then looked at, okay, so is it possible that they are all fighting for the one true way of expressing that reality, or how might we understand them as part of a complete whole? And so what perspectives does each part bring? So what part does physics bring? What part does anthropology and sociology and psychology bring? What part do the great wisdom traditions of the world and spiritual practices bring? And so on. And then so they basically took them all and put them into a cohesive map. So integral theory is actually what's known as a meta theory. It's a theory of theories. And so one of the things that is important about that is that it's not a body of work that is doing its own research. It's basically bringing into the map anything that has been established by another discipline. So everything that has been included in this, I use the term map because the meta theory really is a map of the territory that we understand up to date as human beings, and how each piece that has been contributed by different fields contributes to that whole, but it is not creating any kind of new knowledge or understanding. It's rather trying to help us understand how all of these pieces fit together. So what this work really reveals is that instead of seeing different fields as being in opposition to each other, it rather sees them as being, the term that's used in integral theory is true but partial. So the perspective that mathematics brings and the perspective that the culture of cinema or literature brings are each true in their own perspective, but they're partial in that they do not help us to understand all aspects of our experience or the universe. So it is an attempt to integrate the arts and spirituality and science and psychology and all of the disciplines out there in the world, and to bring them into an understanding of how they all contribute to an overall understanding that humanity now has access to. So it might be obvious at this point, but each perspective brings a piece that contributes to the whole. And at the same time, no individual field or perspective has a monopoly on the truth. In fact, they are incomplete on their own, and yet also have a huge impact on helping us to map everything. So what this unlocks for us is the ability to avoid getting into fights over which perspective is absolutely correct, and rather invites us to say, okay, what is this perspective bringing to the whole? And more importantly, from a very pragmatic standpoint, which is the most useful perspective to take in a given situation? So although this may be a hot button topic for some people, I would like to bring in the example of science versus spirituality. So this is a very common point of contention that individuals and cultures and groups get into, where the one side is asserting one truth and the other side is asserting another truth, and they seem to be in opposition, and so there is all sorts of conflict that arises because of that, when integral is really pointing to the fact that they are basically bringing and arguing different perspectives to a complete whole. So what spiritual traditions are bringing is really a well mapped out system to help us understand the subjective experience of individuals, and in particular how the subjective interior experience of humans can be deepened and explored more broadly and help to create states of consciousness that are more loving and so on. Science helps us map the objective material world, the world that we can all point to and agree on, I see this table, or yes, we can map how far it is to Mars, or I can understand the neurochemistry that's in my brain and we can look at that data together. So science really has brought into our human experience an unparalleled ability to understand and, of course, manipulate our material world. So once we see these truths as being true but partial and being actually, in this case, very complementary, then we can sidestep all of the conflict that is involved in asserting who is right and who is wrong and move into much more productive conversations, deciding, well, are we speaking to a subjective experience in this moment? And if so, let's use these maps. Or are we talking about an exploration of our material experience, the objective world, the concrete world, in which case let's use these other ones. So in the next video, we'll see how integral helps us map this more fully and how there are 4 fundamental perspectives that we can take in looking at any situation.